In today's video, I'll be making my first 2028 presidential election prediction between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and JD Vance, and I'll be explaining why AOC is very likely to get destroyed in the general election. We all know JD Vance is the current vice president and probably the most likely candidate to win the Republican nomination in 2028. While on the Democratic side here, AOC is considered the second most likely Democratic nominee for president, according to Polymarket. There's still a long way to go, but she is considered one of the frontrunners. So without further ado, let's get right into today's video. AOC is not someone who is very electable in terms of the fact that she does not have much of electoral history. AOC has won re-election every single time because she is in a deep blue Democratic district around the New York City, Manhattan/Queens County region. If you look at her positions as well, she is very liberal, very progressive, but also at this point, she has lost some of her grassroots support as well. She voted against cutting funding to Israel despite really saying that she would do that for a long time. Even though this is the more popular position, she's lost some of her grassroots support, while at the same time, many voters simply consider her as too extreme. She's someone who wants to cancel all student debt. She is someone who has ran on the most liberal positions and someone who is a member of the Progressive Squad, which generally would not pay out very well in a general election where you have to win swing states. Anyhow, AOC will still win her safe states. I do think that she'll win less safe states, as in some of these states will be more competitive under her watch. That being said, these are still safe states for AOC. I'm going to just put in her states that will be considered pretty likely. These are states where I still think she's going to win, just not by as large of a margin. So for JD Vance here, he's going to have his safe states, and I think that he'll get a lot more moderates because AOC is someone who's considered much more extreme, and as such also doesn't have the highest approval rating for a politician. So in addition to these very obvious safe states here, Alaska, South Carolina would also be considered safe here for JD Vance. Both voted for Trump by pretty large margins back in 2024. I would also put the states of Florida and Texas as well, so as the states of Iowa and Ohio, just because AOC is not someone who would appeal to a lot of working class voters and to a lot of moderate suburbanites, which are needed to make all these states more competitive. Now, AOC has her likely states. She has New Jersey, Delaware, Rhode Island, and Illinois. These are all states that voted for Joe Biden by safe margins back in 2020. A lot of these states saw margin decreases in 2024. But I think for AOC especially, you're going to see a lot of moderate voters voting against the Democratic Party just because AOC is the candidate. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is way too liberal for a lot of suburbanites, which is why she would lose a lot of her appeal, even in more urban states like New Jersey, like Delaware, and like in Illinois. She's still going to win Colorado though by a likely margin. Colorado's a very progressive state. Now we go to the likely Republican states, which in this case is Maine's 2nd district. I wanted to put it as likely, but Trump won the district by 9. And I think that JD Vance will be able to overperform simply because AOC is more kind of a more progressive Democrat who might do better in the urban areas, but certainly not in a rural district in the state of Maine. Now we go to the more competitive states, the lean and tilt states for both parties. I don't think JD Vance here actually has any likely states. So first off, in the state of Nevada here, in the state of Nevada, the state was decided by just over 3%, 3.1% back in the 2024 general election. I think the state would probably shift a little bit more to the Republican Party as it has been during the last few election cycles. In 2012, Obama won the state by 6.7, 2016, Clinton won the state by 2.4, 2020, despite Biden doing better in the popular vote, it was the same exact margin, and in 2024, the state shifted about 6% in favor of the Republican Party. This would be the best margin of victory for a Republican in the state since George W. Bush in 2000, and that is because Clark County, which has a huge Latino as well as African American population, is heavily shifting away from the Democratic Party. The county is 2/3 of the state's overall population, which is why it is so significant, and thus I would believe that Clark County, as well as the state overall, is too far gone for the Democratic Party just because Latino voters are shifting Republican and so are African American voters, so it's going to be about 4 to 5% J.D. Vance victory in the state of Nevada. Now we go to the state of Arizona, another state that Republicans will probably do pretty well in, just because the state voted for Trump by 5.5%. Now the border was certainly an issue Democrats had in 2024 that they may not have in 2020. And that was why a lot of these more border counties like Santa Cruz County, Yuma County shifted double digits in favor of the Republican Party. That being said, a lot of voters across Arizona are considered quite moderate, people who would vote for like moderate candidates, like Joe Biden, who was perceived as more moderate back in the 2020 general election. Kamala Harris, who was perceived as more far left, did not do as well in Arizona, losing the state by 5.5%. And AOC, being someone from New York, very far from Arizona geographically, and being the most progressive representative probably in the entire United States, would not fare well in areas like Maricopa and Pima counties, and thus I would give the state overall to J.D. Vance here probably by actually a likely margin. We're talking 5 to 6 points there. Now we go to the state of New Mexico. New Mexico is not a very commonly discussed state politically, but it's important to note that the state voted for Harris by about the same margin as Arizona did for Trump, and thus it would still be characterized as a moderately competitive state. And if you look at the numbers here, Harris won the state by 6, and there's again a pretty big Hispanic population there that are considered more moderate, type of liberals who may not be comfortable voting for AOC. Plus, Kamala Harris only won the state by 55,000 votes, and there's still Republican swings across the state, even more liberal areas like Donna Ana County, that's where La Cruz is, and those are the type of areas where there's oil's a big issue. Those are the type of areas where Republicans still have margin of improvement, and Republicans could still swing some votes in Bernalillo County and Santa Fe with pretty large Hispanic populations. Thus, I would say that the state of New Mexico is actually competitive here. I would say that AOC, because of the bad candidate quality she has, she's probably going to only win the state by about 3 to 4%, which would make the state more competitive than the state of Arizona and on the same level as the state of Nevada. Now we go to the next state here, the state of Georgia here. Georgia is a state that has a lot of suburbs that again is extremely important for Democrats to nominate a more moderate candidate. We're talking maybe 1 or 2 Georgia senators, or someone like Andy Beshear, not someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's going to do well in like Atlanta as in Fulton to Cobb, but when you're talking about Gwinnett County, Cobb County, these traditionally more conservative suburbs that have shifted Democratic, for reference, if you look at 2008, a very liberal election, you're talking about McCain won Gwinnett County by 10%. In 2020, when Biden won the state, Biden won Gwinnett by 18%, so that's like a 30% shift. AOC is not going to lose Gwinnett by 10 like Obama did in 2008, but guess what? I do believe that AOC will not do nearly as well as Joe Biden did or even as Kamala Harris did, which would be an issue because Democrats need that type of performance in the suburban regions. And outside of that, you're talking about areas like Cherokee County, Forsyth County. Those counties actually shifted Democratic in the 2024 election, a county like Fayette County. And those are the exurban areas where there's a lot of more moderate Republicans who are more inclined to vote for a moderate Democrat over a more extreme MAGA Republican. But guess what? Those are areas that are not going to vote for AOC, even though they may not really like J.D. Vance. And so Georgia goes Republican by about 4%, in my opinion. Now we go to the state of North Carolina here. In the state of North Carolina, again, I would say that this is, again, a state that does not look too good for the Democratic Party here, especially with AOC on the ballot. The reason is very simple. There's again a high demand for more moderate Democrats here due to the suburban areas around Charlotte as well as Raleigh. Not to mention that even Joe Biden was unable to win the state in 2020. And given that AOC would almost certainly do worse than Biden nationwide, it's going to be very difficult to justify AOC winning the state. There's also a lot of more rural African American populated counties here bordering the state of Virginia like Halifax, Northampton, Bertie counties, these are the type of areas that are shifting heavily to the Republican Party. And so, like, AOC will certainly not be able to reverse that type of a trend, making it even more difficult for Democrats to win North Carolina here, and that is why the state also goes to JD Vance, probably by a lead margin. Before I get to the crucial Rust Belt states here, I'm gonna get rid of some of the more leaning Democratic states, where the states would be probably not even competitive if Democrats ran a better candidate, like Andy Beshear, Josh Shapiro, even someone like Gavin Newsom, but who would be competitive if Democrats ran Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. First off, Virginia. Virginia should not be in play for the Republican Party. The state is long gone for the Republicans. We're talking, in 2004, this was a likely Bush state. 2000, another likely Bush state. 1996, Bob Dole won the state. 1992, H.W. Bush won the state. So it's historically a very conservative state, but because of shifts in the suburban areas around Virginia, around the, Loudoun County, Prince William County, right? These were counties that historically voted Republican and were more competitive under Obama in 2008 and 2012, and not so competitive in 2024 or 2020. That's the type of reason why Democrats are now winning Virginia very comfortably. And so I think AOC would not do well in the suburban areas like Loudoun or Prince William, and she would probably lose Virginia Beach and Chesapeake County because those are historically areas that where Republicans do better in, and where there's a lot of moderate Republicans who could not vote, in their opinion, for Donald Trump, but might be more willing to vote for JD Vance, not to mention they simply will not vote for someone like AOC, who wants, student loan forgiveness, support for Palestine, and issues along those lines. And therefore, I would give Virginia now as lean Democratic, probably D plus 3 to 4. I would say that the state would definitely go more towards a likely end for any other Democratic candidate, but not for AOC. Minnesota is a very progressive state here, and so this is one of those states where I do not believe that having AOC on the ballot would necessarily hurt the Democratic Party. Ilhan Omar is from the Minneapolis area. Her district is based in Hennepin County, stretches a little bit in Ramsey County, where these are core Democratic areas, and these are the type of areas who generally actually nominate more progressive candidates. And although I definitely see AOC doing worse in the rural areas, realistically the Twin Cities are about 25% of the state's overall population. If you add in the suburban areas, it's closer to 40%. You're going to talk about someone like AOC who has that urban appeal. It doesn't really matter if Republicans do better in the rural areas. It would matter as to shrinking the margin, but I still believe AOC should be able to win the state of Minnesota. Now we go to Nebraska second. This is a trending blue district. Again, it's a district where there's a lot of moderate voters. The district was not even competitive back in 2004 or 2000. It was a safe Bush district. Bush won it twice by over 18% in both elections. But if you fast forward to 2024, this is a solidly blue district. Even though the districting made the district redder, it's still actually in the long run kind of trended towards the Democratic Party. It's uniquely toxic to Donald Trump, but even then, even before the Trump era, in 2004, the district went for Bush by 22. In 2008, there was no plan of redistricting, and all of a sudden, Obama wins the district by 1.3%. So the district is clearly trending blue, and so even though AOC is not the right candidate for it, it doesn't really matter, it's going to go lean Democratic. Maine's at-large vote as well, I do believe this will go lean Democratic. It just makes sense. The area does employ ranked choice voting, and generally, even if Democrats don't win the state outright, even if they're below 50%, technically ranked choice voting would also put Democrats over, because the Green Party candidate generally gets third across the state. Not to mention that Maine's 1st district, which generally has much higher voter turnout, is so heavily Democratic. It's around the Portland region. While the more rural district in the state, Maine's 2nd district, more conservative, generally has lower voter turnout. Not to mention that Portland is like 25%, if not more, of the state's population. Thus, it's just too hard for the Republicans to flip, even though AOC is a Democratic nominee. Now, New Hampshire is an interesting one because it was a state that was not on the radar as that competitive in 2024. Yet the state was decided by less than 3%, 2.8%, despite Trump making more negative comments about the state, calling it a drug-infested state. and that didn't appear to really hurt Trump at all. Kamala Harris was not the best Democratic nominee, but AOC is certainly even worse than Kamala Harris as in terms of the quality of the Democratic nominee. There's a lot of moderates across New Hampshire. White college-educated voters are a big group of the state's population. They're more willing to vote for like a Biden than they would be like an AOC. That being said, New Hampshire has a Democratic voting history, and even the governor, Chris Sununu, he's someone who is the former governor now. He's someone who's more of a liberal Republican, and even then, I believe in his last re-election bid, his opponent got like 45% of the vote. So Democrats still have a solid base there. It's gonna be tilt Democratic. AOC won't do too well, but it's gonna be enough for the Democratic Party, kind of like a Clinton victory back in 2016. And now we go to the three Rust Belt states. Of course, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. I'm gonna start with Wisconsin here. Wisconsin, the most important group of voters in Wisconsin is the rural voters, the working class voters across the state. For example, I'll just look at, 2008. The rural areas voted for Obama by a huge margin. Most notably in Ron Kind's district over here, the area where my mouse is hovering over, Obama won these areas by more than 20 points in most cases. And guess what? Fast forward to 2024 or even to 2016, these areas are heavily trending to the Republican Party. That's the issue, and AOC is not going to repair that issue. AOC is going to make the rural slide for the Democratic Party even worse because she has no appeal to working class voters. Another issue AOC has is the wild counties. This is an area where Democrats have been doing better and better over the years. Waukesha voted for Trump by less than 20 in 2024, voted for Trump by 21 in 2020, voted for Trump by 26 in 2016, surprisingly voted for Romney and McCain by larger margins than voted for Trump in 2024 and 2020. Because there's a lot of moderate voters in this area, kind of the narrative you see throughout the country. And guess what? AOC is nowhere close to a moderate. JD Vance is more moderate than AOC, and that's going to be a big problem for the Democratic Party in some of these areas around the wild counties. That's going to be an issue for the Democratic Party. They're not going to do well in the wild counties, which are very populated. The wild counties combined is almost the population of Milwaukee County, for example. I do believe that AOC will do well in Dane and still pretty well in Milwaukee, but that's not going to be enough for her to win the state. When the entire remaining state is very Republican leaning, the state will probably go for JD Vance by 2 to 3%, even though Vance is not the best candidate. Now we move on here to the state of Michigan, which is home to the largest group of Arab American voters located in Dearborn, Detroit. One of the interesting things about Dearborn back in the 2024 election was that Kamala Harris lost the city overall by about 6%. However, Elisa Slotkin, the Democratic senator, won it by 3%. And very interestingly, for a representative in Congress for the U.S. House, Rashida Tlaib, the Democrat, won by more than 30%. And this is one of those areas where AOC would actually be able to do well, because Dearborn historically has voted Democratic 30-40 points, but voted for Donald Trump in 2024. In fact, the Green Party candidate, Jill Stein, got 18% of the vote here. This is one of those areas where a progressive could do better. And this is one of those areas where AOC would actually overperform Kamala Harris. However, it's not going to be enough because reality-wise, she's going to underperform significantly in the rural areas, and as well as areas like Macomb County, the more blue-collar working-class region, and even to a lesser extent Oakland County, home to the more white-collar type of working-class environment, and also a very big suburban county. Similarly, in Kent here, Biden was the first Democrat in 60 years to win Kent County. Kamala Harris held it by a comfortable 6%. I think AOC would realistically lose this type of suburban county, which has been trending more Democratic. Overall, I think that AOC will probably make Michigan the closest of all these competitive states, but not enough to win it overall. I give it to JD Vance by 1.5, similar to Harris's margin of loss back in 2024. And we now go to the state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has a lot of Jewish Americans, and of course, they're not going to really appreciate AOC being the Democratic nominee. That is why Josh Shapiro in 2022 was able to win it by 17%. He was a supporter of Israel, and of course, Doug Mastriano was too conservative. too extreme and didn't have, the best type of name recognition, had a lot of stereotypes associated with him. But even then, that is why Josh Shapiro won the state of Pennsylvania by such a large margin. And AOC will not do well in an area like Bucks County, which is very working class, or Northampton or Monroe. This is the core of the Democratic support. Democrats need to win those areas by larger margins, like Obama did back in, for example, 2008, when Obama comfortably won the state. It was because Democrats ran huge numbers in Monroe, Northampton, Lehigh, Bucks County, which they were not able to do in 2024. Another part of the equation is rural areas. Of course, we're not going to see Elk County or Cambria County go for a Democrat, but realistically, Democrats want to make them more competitive, or at least less lopsided for the Republican Party. AOC does exactly the opposite. She might actually improve, minority voter appeal in Philadelphia, where Democrats have been struggling a bit. Clinton won it by 67, Harris won it by 59, Obama won it by 67, and then 71 in 2012. This is the area where AOC could do better in some of those regions, in some of those minority communities, but she certainly will not do well in the suburban areas where it really matters. And just winning Philadelphia County will not get her anywhere near winning the state of Pennsylvania overall, especially when she's slipping hugely in the suburban areas and the rurals. So Pennsylvania goes for JD Vance by 2 to 3%. Rounding my prediction off, AOC is probably an F-tier candidate for the Democratic Party. I could probably think of worse candidates, but I would certainly not run AOC if I was a Democrat. Thank you so much for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.